purchaser of vehicles and charging stations. So at the end of my time, I'll just sum up by saying I'm so pleased that the committee is looking at these items, and we really think electrified transportation can be a big part of the solution here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Allen. A pleasure to see you again. You presented at the Canada-US committee last week, and full disclosure, I am still a client. With that, we will start our round of questions. Our first 6-minute round will go to MP Poilievre. You have the floor.
Thank you. My lead question goes to the Honourable Dan McTeague. Mr. McTeague, here in Ontario, the government, roughly 10 years ago, promised that we would create a brand new industry of wind power and solar panels to replace traditional sources of energy. To do that, they created something called the feed-in tariff, which paid the wholesale vendors of this electricity 90 cents a kilowatt hour for solar and 20 cents a kilowatt hour for wind, even though the market price for electricity in the province is about 3 or 4 cents. So in other words, we were paying about 20 times what the electricity was worth. Now, as a result of locking in these exorbitant contracts for 25 years, the average Ontarian opens their power bill and finds that about 75% of it is not for electricity at all. It's for what's called the global adjustment, which is the subsidy we're paying for wind and solar. Now, what has been the consequence of that? One, we've doubled electricity prices in Ontario. Two, we have driven people into poverty. According to the Ontario Association of Food Banks, there's something in Ontario called energy poverty, where people are walking in asking for food because they can't afford to feed themselves and pay the newly doubled electricity rates. Three, it increased emissions because instead of relying on zero emission nuclear and hydro, we ended up having to bring in more natural gas powered electricity in order to provide base load for the intermittence of wind and solar. And then finally, we drove many of our manufacturing jobs out of the province because, frankly, companies can't afford to compete running their factories on electricity that is among the highest in North America. Do you, Mr. McTeague, you are a former Liberal MP, do you worry that the monstrous new subsidies that the current government and a whole series of activists and corporate interests, self-serving corporate interests, are advocating for will similarly harm the environment, drive up poverty, and increase inequality?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's there's a lot to consider there. I recall sitting with a former colleague of all of yours, my good friend who I introduced to the Liberal Party many years ago, Arnold Chan, when he worked for the province, and pulled me aside, ironically, at a little bistro on Young and Shepherd, I think, in Mr. Sassey's riding, to suggest that the Green Project, the Green Energy Act, was going to leave a devastating impact on Ontarians. 10 years later, he's correct. And of course, I look at my bill, 5.7, 5.8 cents a kilowatt hour, now moving to 17 cents a kilowatt hour. Massive increases in the cost for pretty much everyone, not just manufacturing, as you pointed out, but for consumers. And let's not forget, a $6.5 billion debt that the province of Ontario is incurring each and every year in order to, as it were, cushion the effect of these increases. If you want an example of how not to go about pushing green energy, the Ontario model, for which many of my colleagues in the House now have really derived their push on energy, now sit. This is definitely not a model in which to follow. What concerns me about all this, though, is that there is very little discussion about the fact that Canadians are seeing ever increasing levels of cost, the cost of living, the material effect it's having on their bottom line. Is it any wonder, Mr. Poilievre, that we see MNP, insolvency trustees, coming out saying that 53% of Canadians are less than $200 away from bankruptcy? So while we talk about all these wonderful ideas, how we want to convert the rest of the world, while we're dealing with a veritable crisis, a health crisis, not a climate crisis, Why are we talking about something that is completely irrelevant, perhaps devastating to the economy as a whole, at a time in which we should be rewarding and working hard to get our energy sector back up and running? We have a great record. I was a member of Parliament for a riding that invented clean energy. Long before it was 50 years before that, we had things such as, so 50 years before that, we had the Adam Beck hydroelectric projects. We have produced clean energy. We should continue down that road, emphasize technology as it comes forward and not taxes that burden the Canadian economy at a time that is extremely sensitive to most Canadians.
Madam Chair, we're losing the sound.
Is lagging.
Down.
Yeah, I've just paused your clock. I'm not sure if you could give us about 10 seconds. I want to see if we're able to hear you, because translation cannot pick up your sound.
Okay, hang on. Yeah, thank you. Dan, stop using internet.
Mr. McTeague, you're not on mute.
I know.
Okay. Do you want to, if you can go back about 20 seconds and then we'll start back the clock. Thank you.
Thank you. And technology is still eluding me, but not. The idea behind green energy is a wonderful thought, but it has to take a second place, a second seat, and a back seat, I think, in regards to the cost at a time in which Canadians are not able to make ends meet. As MNP has quite rightly pointed out, 53% of Canadians are now in a situation where they're less than $200 away from going bankrupt. So I think these are very sobering numbers. We should take those into consideration first.
And according to the Ontario Auditor General, the Green Energy Act is going to lead to overpayments for electricity amounting to about $130 billion over 3 decades. That's enough to fund Ontario's healthcare system for almost 2 years. That is the real consequence of these schemes. And of course, it is a monstrous wealth transfer from the working poor to the super rich who've gotten all of these sweetheart deals from the government. So let's keep these facts in mind before we sign up to these massive new interventions that will, as always, favor the rich, punish the poor, and do little for the environment. Thank you.
There he is. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Mr. Cairo, thank you for being here today. Very proud to have a local business, a champion of innovation and technology, testifying before this august committee. Now, what you are doing is making housing more affordable with your technology. And as I see it, that's an opportunity to provide home ownership to people who would otherwise be stuck renting for the rest of their lives. Can you talk a bit about how your technology will enable working class people to aspire to and achieve the dream of home ownership?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Poilievre. It's one of our, it's actually a very important part of our philosophical underpinning that we address affordability in housing stock. It's becoming an extreme issue, not only in Ottawa, but across the country. And manufacturing practices do have a whole host of solutions that are available to address the issue. The biggest factor that is creating an affordability issue, obviously, is the cost of underlying land and the lack of land supply for urban home inventory. After that, building costs have skyrocketed, and the cost to assemble in traditional fashion homes has really skyrocketed. And
can I ask for a clarification?
Yes.
You say that land costs and land scarcity is a problem. We live in one of the most abundant countries in the world when it comes to land. We have among the lowest population densities of any nation on planet Earth. How is it possible that we have a shortage of land?
Municipalities over the last, in Ontario, but also with the previous government in Ontario, had made some pretty drastic maneuvers to intensify growth within existing urban areas instead of allowing for responsible and sustainable growth to continue outside of existing urban areas. And what that's led to is, in part, threats on existing neighborhoods that are dealing with, mid-rise and high-rise buildings in their backyards, which they're very adamantly opposed to. But some of that mixed use is important. That being said, we've taken such an extreme, intensification approach to growth that the cost of a new home has dramatically increased. The demand, especially from new Canadians, is for a backyard and what Canada has to offer, by way of a lifestyle change. And forcing them into towers has been difficult. And what's happened as demand has skyrocketed relative to the little supply coming on is that new home inventory has dramatically changed in price.
Right. So basically, working class people, immigrants want and should have the opportunity to earn a good wage and put that money towards a good home, but municipal and provincial governments prevent them from doing so by restricting their access to land, even though Canada has more space where there's no one than we have where there's anyone, even though if you spread Canadians out evenly, we'd have more than a football field for every single Canadian. Somehow we have a land shortage. That is a government failure, not a market failure. Now, that's the supply side. On the demand side, you are telling me that the cost of raw materials are rising. I've seen that these prices have gone up, corresponding with the Bank of Canada printing unprecedented amounts of money. We've seen lumber prices go up 400%. Commodity prices are up 50%. And that obviously gets baked into a house price. Are you seeing the same inflationary pressures over the last year since the central bank started printing cash?
Your referred to increased statistics are actually very much correct. And it is a severe issue in the cost of a new home.
And this is an inflation tax that hurts working class people because their wages don't go as far. Of course, it's very good news for extremely wealthy people whose assets become far more valuable. Thus, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Tell me how a company like yours can counter that unjust effect by making housing more affordable and by unleashing the power of the free enterprise system to give people the opportunity to own a home.
So traditionally, new home builders are able to prevent a whole host of competition by owning the very rare land resource. If we could create competition by manufacturing housing in a new way that's disconnected from land ownership, I think that competition for the building products and the homes themselves might trigger a more affordable housing stock. It doesn't address anywhere near the magnitude of increase in land value that's the big issue, or the taxation built into municipal fees, provincial fees, and tax. But I do think competition around manufactured product will make a positive impact on the overall affordability of new homes.
Thank you very much.
Don't forget to like, dislike, subscribe, and comment. Safe Space Cafe. And always, have a good day.